Go ahead, hit subscribe if you dare, because once you step into this darkness, you won't look at Australia the same way again. The rain had turned the highway outside Newcastle into a sheet of black glass when police finally stopped the silver Uda. Sirens bled into the night, and steam lifted from the engine like breath from a sleeping animal. The driver kept his hands tight on the wheel, knuckles drained of color. In the tray of the Uda was a blue tarp, and beneath that tarp was a reason the entire state had been on edge for weeks. Just hours earlier, a missing persons case had shifted into something far worse. A bushwalker had stumbled on a burned campsite in the Wadigans, abandoned food, scattered clothing, and a smell the wind refused to carry away. The call had gone out, and from that moment, a clock began to tick that every officer could hear. The victim was Eleanor Ward, a nurse who had clocked off late from the hospital and vanished between the staff car park and her front door. No ransom, no messages, just absence, and a town that swallowed questions rather than answers. Detective Maria Halvorsen had seen grief before, but this felt different. This felt organized, calm, deliberate. She walked around the Uda now, boots sinking into mud, and met the driver's eyes through the window. He looked back at her, as if he were already somewhere else, standing inside a memory she could not reach. They pulled back the tarp. What they found didn't give closure. It opened a door. Word spread fast. The press vans arrived first, headlights cutting through mist. Neighbors locked doors they hadn't locked in years. Australia prides itself on wide-open spaces and easy distances, but that night everything narrowed. Streets felt like corridors. Windows felt watched. Eleanor's family was brought in quietly, past cameras, to a room where silence weighed more than any sentence. They described her as kind, dependable, the sort of person people turned to when things fell apart. That description made what happened to her feel personal. Too personal. The suspect, Daniel Reeve, worked with Eleanor's brother at a freight company on the outskirts town. No criminal record. No previous warnings. A face you could pass in a supermarket and forget before you reached the checkout. He asked for a lawyer. He asked for water. He did not ask why he was there. The investigation stretched across coastal roads and inland scrub. CCTV showed Eleanor's car driving a route she never took. Phone records revealed late-night messages from an unknown number, abruptly deleted. At her house, the front door lock bore tiny scratches, like someone had practiced on it. Her diary had a page torn cleanly out. Maria stood in Eleanor's kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just the crime. It was the carefulness of it. The house wasn't ransacked. There were no signs of panic. Whoever had come here had taken their time. Then came the first twist. Forensics called from the station. In Daniel Reeves' Uda, in the folds of the tarp, they had found fibers that did not belong to Eleanor. Not from her clothing. Not from her home. A second, unknown profile. And there was something else. Traces of red desert dust from Western Australia, hundreds of miles from where they stood. The room shifted. This wasn't a single incident. It wasn't random. It was a trail. Maria opened the evidence file again, slower this time, letting every photograph sit longer than was comfortable. Different states. Different missing persons. Similar gaps. Similar silences. The team worked through the night. Maps went up on walls. Lines were drawn between towns that had nothing in common except one thing. People who had disappeared quietly, leaving behind lives mid-sentence. At 3:17 a.m., a junior officer flagged something that made the entire task force go still. A storage unit rented under a false name on the industrial edge of the city, paid in cash, linked by number to the burner phone that had messaged Eleanor before she vanished. They drove there before dawn. The roller door shook as it rose. Dust drifted in pale light. Shelves lined the walls, neatly arranged with ordinary objects that suddenly felt wrong. License plates, phone cases, a box of house keys labeled only by dates. And at the back of the unit stood a narrow door, painted the same color as the wall, easy to miss unless you were looking for it. The lock was new. Maria placed her hand against the cool metal, feeling the pulse at her wrist hammer back at her. When they opened that door, what they found didn't just change the case. It changed the meaning of every disappearance they thought they understood. The door swung inward with a tired metallic sigh, as if it had been waiting to be opened for years. The air inside the hidden room was colder, stiller, and carried a faint chemical tang that clung to the back of the throat. Lights flickered on, and for a moment nobody spoke. The room wasn't big. It didn't have to be. Along one wall were corkboards layered with newspaper clippings, missing person posters, and printed photographs. Thin strands of red string stitched cities together, like an outline of a story no one wanted to read. The victims weren't the same age, didn't come from the same places, didn't share the same lives. But every face looked like it had been chosen. On the floor, stacked in careful rows, were plastic crates labeled only with dates. No names, no locations, just time marching in order. Maria stepped forward, every instinct pulling taut. She had been on cases with obsession before, but this was something worse. Not rage, not impulse, but control. The kind that plans mornings and rehearses nights. The kind that studies. Daniel Reeves sat in an interview room miles away, calm, saying little. Yet here was this room, this archive, this quiet museum of disappearances. If he wasn't the architect of everything, he was close to someone who was. They opened the first crate. Inside were personal belongings, each sealed in clear bags, a bracelet engraved with initials, a folded bus ticket, a set of keys with a worn kangaroo keychain. Normal items, stripped of their owners, suddenly unbearably loud. Each one represented a life that had simply stopped appearing in photos, stopped answering calls, stopped existing anywhere except in the questions left behind. The second crate told a different story. There were maps, detailed, annotated, with circles drawn around remote stretches of highway and inland tracks disappearing into the scrub. Some coordinates were underlined twice. Next to them were short notes written in tight, patient handwriting. Too close. Moved earlier than expected. Return in winter. None of it made sense yet. All of it felt deliberate. Outside, dawn crept through thin clouds and washed the industrial estate in pale gray. The world continued, unaware that inside this concrete box, patterns were being uncovered that stretched across half a continent. Back at the station, Maria watched Daniel through the glass. He sat still, elbows on the table, eyes unfocused but alert. He didn't look cornered. He looked like someone measuring the room. "Daniel," she said when she entered, voice steady. "We opened the storage unit." A flicker, not fear, not surprise, but calculation, crossed his face before it was gone. "We found other people's belongings," she continued, "not just Eleanor's. Items tied to disappearances from Western Australia, South Australia, New South Wales. You rented that unit. You paid cash. You used a false name. Help me understand why." He didn't answer immediately. He studied the grain of the table, as if something important were hidden in the wood. Finally, he spoke. "You're looking in the wrong direction." The words weren't a denial. They were a deflection with edges. "Wrong direction how?" Maria asked. He leaned back slowly. "You think you're chasing a person," he said quietly. "You're chasing a plan." That sentence landed like weight. Meanwhile, the forensic team finished cataloging the hidden room. One of the officers called Maria over to examine a separate folder found taped behind a board, as if it were meant to be overlooked by anyone in a hurry. Inside were flight confirmations, cash transfers, and surveillance photos taken from a distance, people entering hospitals, service stations, airports. It wasn't random. It was targeted. The victims were connected by something invisible at first glance. Buried in the final page of the folder was a list. Not names, initials, dates, and one chilling column labeled simply, "Next." The latest date was only days away. Suddenly, the investigation wasn't about understanding the past. It was about stopping the future. A joint task force was formed before midday. Jurisdictions that rarely spoke found themselves sharing walls, pinning maps, tracing movements of vehicles across deserts and coastlines. Every minute mattered now, because every minute might belong to someone whose life had been quietly scheduled. Maria went back into the interview room. The list burned into her thoughts. "Who else is involved?" she asked. "Who built this? Because it didn't start with you, and it doesn't end with you." Daniel looked at her then, really looked, and there was something like relief in his eyes, as if someone had finally said the right thing. "I didn't start it," he said. "But I tried to stop it." The room went silent. He took a breath, the first heavy one since he'd been brought in. "You think Eleanor was chosen," he continued. "She wasn't. She discovered something she was never meant to see. That's why she died." Maria felt the cold of the storage unit again, creeping up her spine. "What did she discover?" she asked. Daniel's gaze shifted to the camera in the corner, then back to her. "That list you found," he said. "It's not predictions." He paused. "It's a schedule. And the initials at the top of the next column belong to someone already inside the investigation." The realization moved through the room like a chill wind. The initials at the top of the list. Everyone silently began matching letters in their heads, thinking of colleagues, analysts, officers. Maria didn't say anything at first. She already knew. They belonged to her partner on the case, Senior Constable Aaron Blake. The station suddenly felt smaller. Footsteps echoed in hallways where the lights seemed too bright. Maria walked with deliberate calm, not running, not alerting anyone. Every instinct battling the fact that the investigation had just turned inward. Betrayal in a case is one thing. Betrayal inside the badge is another. Blake's desk was neat to the point of sterility. No clutter, no loose notes, just order, too much order. A small metal drawer stuck for a moment before it slid open with a soft scrape. Inside was a phone that wasn't registered to any department inventory, its screen dark but warm, as if used recently. A single notification glowed when she pressed the power button. One message. Tonight, same place. Not an address, not a name, just confidence that the recipient would know exactly where to go. Maria felt the investigation shift from being about evidence to being about time. The schedule, the next name, and the person already walking into danger without knowing it. She returned to Daniel. "You're going to tell me where," she said, words even anchored by urgency. He didn't argue. Whatever line he had crossed before, he didn't intend to cross another now. "Oh, Quarry," he said. "North of town. No lights. Easy access in and out. It's quiet. That's the point." Night fell quickly on the road out past the last suburban streetlights, where the bush swallowed sound in distance. Gravel popped under tires. A thin moon floated above broken clouds. Maria drove with sirens off, headlights low, every sense alive. Backup followed at a distance to avoid spooking whoever was waiting at the quarry. The quarry mouth opened like a wound in the landscape. Water at the bottom reflected the night sky in pieces. On the far side, a lone car sat with its cabin light on, door ajar. Aaron Blake stood beside it, phone in hand, back turned. "Aaron," Maria called. He turned slowly. Surprise flickered, then something heavier. Resignation, maybe, or recognition that a clock had finally run down. "You weren't supposed to be here," he said quietly. "You were the target," she replied. "Someone scheduled you." "Why?" He exhaled, eyes drifting toward the dark water. "Because I found them," he said. "Years ago. A pattern hidden. In missing persons nobody wanted to connect. I pushed. It closed. Files were moved. I kept digging anyway." "And Eleanor?" Maria asked. "She saw my notes," he replied. She understood too quickly. That made her visible. There was movement in the shadows then, subtle but unmistakable. Figures where there should have been none. Not chaos. Positioning. The realization settled in with grim finality. This wasn't one person. The plan, the schedule, the meticulous record-keeping. It had always been bigger than any single offender. The quarry wasn't only a place. It was a meeting point, an exchange in a system that survived because people looked away, and because those who saw too much were removed from the calendar. Lights erupted as the backup team advanced. Orders were shouted. Gravel skidded. For a moment the night broke apart into fragmented motion. A figure ran for the tree-line, but slipped on loose stone, tackled before they could vanish. Another froze, hands lifted, face drained of all color. The silence of long planning cracked under the noise of consequences finally arriving. Maria reached Aaron, pulling him behind the line of vehicles. The threat receding but not gone, because threat is not only people. Sometimes it is structure. When the arrests were processed and the quarry emptied, dawn touched the horizon again, thin and pale. Files were unsealed. Patterns that had lived in shadows moved onto white walls and official record. The schedule stopped being a secret. Weeks later, Maria stood in the storage unit one last time. The crates were gone. The lists had been logged. The narrow door no longer hid anything. But emptiness carries echoes. She traced the outline where the corkboard once hung and thought of lives that would not fit neatly into reports or into closure. Cases were reopened across states. Families received calls they had stopped expecting. Some answers hurt more than questions ever had, but truth has its own gravity. It pulls, eventually. Daniel Reed was charged, not as mastermind, but as participant in a network that thrived on silence. Aaron returned to duty after internal investigation cleared his involvement in the crimes, but not the burden of what he knew. Knowledge leaves marks even when the body does not. Australia moved on the way nations do, forward but changed, with a memory of a darkness that had stretched across maps and calendars. The country's wide spaces didn't feel empty anymore. They felt watched and watching. They thought the schedule had been destroyed. But 3 months later, an envelope arrived at the task force office with no return address. Inside was a single page, typed dated. At the top, one word: resumed. If you think this case was the darkest, you're not ready for the next one.